Coming up, we continue to look at top prospects for the Brooklyn Nets in next year's draft class. This time, a player from overseas in French product, Nolan Traore. Is he the lightning quick asset that helps set off the backcourt for Brooklyn? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. And Doug, it's also time to take a look at another prospect as we continue our journey of tanking Brooklyn Nets and all of these incredibly talented players that potentially could land in Brooklyn a year from now. Getting into the middle of that top 10 class, French player Nolan Traore, who has a lot to like about him, including being incredibly young at the time of the draft next year.
Yeah, look, it wouldn't be the 2024-25 net season if it wasn't 11 months or 12 months away, 10 months away from the draft, and we're already talking about it because that's the way that this season is going to unfold. We're going to end up doing a lot of draft coverage over the course of the season as we follow along with some of these prospects, and like sort of in parallel to whatever's happening with the net season, which is almost for sure going to include a million losses. And so, on a high level, looking at Nolan Traore right now, projected number 4 overall pick. These things never stick from now till the end of the season, so we'll see where it ends up landing. I will say, before we get to Traore, if the Nets fell all the way to the 4th pick, we'd be feeling not amazing, right? I can already picture what that podcast would look like if we go through a whole season of 18, 19, 20 wins, and then it's the 4th pick. It's going to be a whole other set of problems. But with Traore, I will say, if what you're getting with him is a guy who we'll get to here is clearly a dude that could translate at the NBA level, probably pretty close right now to being able to make the jump with a whole season to play in France. But there's a ton to like about this guy.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll touch back on your comment there about what it would mean to not have maybe the number 1 overall pick in next year's draft class after a difficult year. But only going to be 19 years old, just over 19 at the time of the draft next year. Now, we talk about measurables, 6'3", 6'4", 175 pounds. So he is wafer thin when it comes to just body frame and what you see. But when you go and watch him, there's also an incredible amount of quickness and energy and court vision. Like, there's a lot to like about Traore. If we get beyond the idea that the Nets fell out of those top 3 picks and what that would mean, we said this about a number of other prospects in this kind of pocket where there's a lot of upside. There's a lot of things on tape to like. It comes down to whether or not you think all of those elements develop, whether or not in this case he puts some muscle onto his frame and makes himself capable of playing at the physicality of the NBA level. But from a skill set standpoint, he does represent somebody, I think, unique relative to other players inside of this top 10 backcourt talent with real court vision and really some quick on-ball ability, especially from getting off a shot too.
Yeah, look, the last guy we talked about was Dylan Harper, another point guard. But these guys are in totally different molds. If you look at Dylan Harper versus Traore, like they're both labeled as point guards, and they both do play point guard, but they go about their business in 2 completely different ways. Traore specifically is so fast. Like for sure the fastest guy that we have talked about yet, just from a pure 0 to 60 up and down, sort of like vertical speed or up and down the court. Like there's no one really comparable so far in this draft class that we've looked at. I don't think that compares on the speed level. And so I think just from starting there, if you look at just his overall ability to just stop and start, to blow by defenders, to get into the paint, to get into the paint and not just like try to always just battering ram his way to the basket either, to get into the paint and then be able to look and sort of like understand and synthesize very quickly like what the best move is. He's much better at Dylan Harper than that. Now, Harper has other skills that Traore doesn't. I mean, he's bigger. I think he has maybe slightly better like overall court vision, mostly because he can probably see a little bit better. But Traore, just from going, like if you're looking for a guy on like hit aheads, if you're looking for a guy who you want to start a fast break, if you want to just get out in the open court and start running, if you want to run high pick and roll where he's going to be able to split every defender, like Traore is really, really that guy. And we can get into like maybe some of the downsides of his game, but from a if you think of that as your point guard mold, right? As like a speed, get past guys, he's more in that mold than Harper is, even though I would take Harper over him right now. Mostly probably if I had to flip a coin, it'd be because of the size.
Yeah, no, you mentioned, I mean, among the things there that I think he does well, Traore, the pick and roll play is nice, and it goes back to his quickness, mostly because there's not a lack of decision making when it comes to that. Plays into it, plays through it, and then it's okay, I'm going downhill, as you mentioned, getting into the paint, or I'm making the pass out to the wing, whatever it may be. And then the other one, you talk about getting into the paint. Listen, when 6'3" and 175, you can envision a world where at the NBA level, he's maybe getting bounced around a little bit. He does play through contact well, but is he going to be strong enough to do it? But when he gets into the paint and he pulls up that little push shot from, midway through the lane because he knows that he has the time and the space to do it, and he gets that release off very quickly, or he navigates and goes off the edge and plays it off glass, or gets into there and then finds a way to distribute out to teammates. Like you mentioned, the decision-making ability for him seems to be at about as close to a pro level as you could want it to be right now. Whether or not the size, you say, talking about downside, we'll get into, that's maybe the biggest factor here. And we talked about this with other prospects. At 19 years old, it still means that there is a little bit, not just from a muscle standpoint, but you could put maybe an extra inch on that height as well, right? 6'3", 6'4". Can you get to 6'4", 6'5" when you get into the pro level? That could be a difference maker for him in terms of how effective he can be. But I agree with you. It's not even just, for me, the transition game or the speed of his game, but that speed plays even when you're in offensive sets, even when you're breaking down to half court. Everything he does comes at a pace, which I think is really important if you're talking about pure backcourt player. And we said this before, related to the Brooklyn Nets, that's something they need. More than just a guy that can pass, a guy that can also get off his own shot and can make the right decisions inside of that backcourt. Coming up here in a second, let's take a look at the other side. The shot is not perfect for him. Some of the stats are not perfect for him when it comes to perimeter shooting. We'll look at that and why maybe he's not considered among those top 3 players that we've highlighted before in next year's draft class. Excuse me. We'll dive into that coming up here next.
All right, before we get to that, let you know the show's sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, you think about learning. What do you think about like when you used to love to learn? Maybe as an adult, are you making the time to learn new things as often as you like? Or was that lost when you were just a kid? Like kids are always learning and growing. As adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. We know how it gets. Life can come at you pretty fast. Maybe you'll just make that list of things that you used to want to get into, but you're just not finding the time as much anymore. Look, therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder. It can be giving you some of that back to school vibes as well. Let you know that it can come at any age. Therapy is about learning new things. It's about coping skills. It's about setting boundaries. It's about empowering you to just be the best version of yourself. This is all the kind of stuff that BetterHelp can get you going on. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you have to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient. It's flexible. It's totally suited to your schedule. You just got to fill out a brief questionnaire. You're going to get matched with a licensed therapist. You switch anytime. No additional charge. Want to make sure it's working with you and for you. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, we remind you that we always thank you for making us your first listen of the day. But for your second listen, check out Locked On NBA podcast. You know there's no offseason for the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts just like myself and Doug Norrie in only 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed or entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And you know it. It's your team, and it's every single day. We talk about the downside of a player like Nolan Traore and why he falls outside of maybe the top 3 picks or even 4 picks. And probably, by the way, before we get into the downside, I think we said this about watching more college game or watching more international play. I think this season too, a lot of it is going to be how does the stock of some of these players rise and fall? In many ways, we think that those top 3 guys feel pretty cemented in being inside of that top 3 group. But everybody else, 4 through 10 and even beyond in the lottery, you agree, like there's just this world where a couple of guys fall out of that, or potentially 2 or 3 players start to push up towards it that we'll talk about as we get into the NBA season as well.
I mean, yeah, these aren't set in stone. These guys are going to have seasons that are just going to like sort of tell the tale. I could see. I'd be shocked if Flagg and Ace, like Cooper Flagg and Ace Bailey, like they didn't stay at 1-2. Like that would short of an injury. And honestly, maybe even an injury.
And even then, they might still say,
I'd be floored if those guys didn't come out of this 1-2. I do think after that we could see a shuffling of the deck, only because those first 2 guys, and I'll get to Traore here in a second, but like those first 2 guys, they check almost every box, right? Like there's just, want to throw out a few little things here and there, maybe, but they are as close to like just kind of set it and forget it prospects as you're really going to see. The next guys like Harper, like Traore, who's the other guy we talked about?
We're talking about Edgecombe coming up here.
We're going to talk about BJ Edgecombe tomorrow. You can pick up, and then like getting even lower into like Trey Johnson's, right? Like you can pick apart if you really want to get into the nitty gritty. Like you can find things that like, hey, that might not translate, right? And so with Traore, okay, you already mentioned the size. Like, look, again, I'm just trying to recap here. Speed, that plays at the NBA level now. He's fast enough now, and I think he actually could probably start running pick and roll now, right? Like, so I think that is already there. And if it's not there, it's so close, right? And vision and all that stuff. So like going through all the positives, I think he has some of that stuff already. If you want to knock parts of his game, though, where he can't like get into that next group, like where he wouldn't go 1-2, right? Like where he's not going to challenge other guys. He's small or on the smaller side, which is always going to be a problem, or it could be a concern.
Right, you have to be elite. If you're going to be slight of frame, that means you need to be elite at everything you do.
And the shooting hasn't come around, but I will say yet. Like, I think that the shooting right now hasn't like been super efficient. But if you watch him, I think it's kind of for 2 reasons. One, he doesn't take a lot of shots from the perimeter, mostly because he can blow by his defender all the time.
Right.
So he just kind of like doesn't need to do a lot of catch and shoot stuff or just like dribble back. He has shown like be able to step back and do some other stuff. But I actually think, and so it hasn't gone in, but if you look at the form, I think it actually is probably going to be fine. And so those are the things holding him back right now. But to me, they're not massive negatives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair. And he also, I think his free throw shooting, is the other area they talk about. And usually with those things kind of going in tandem and how they pair. And you're right. Sometimes a lack of sample size can also be a positive, or when certain things like being able to blow by defenders look so good, you're willing to overlook this other area. But if we're talking about what would we want to see over the year to come of watching Traore play from a distance, it'd be that. And if you're Traore, you probably want to showcase that can be a part of my game as well. I've just been highly efficient in these other areas, so I'm going to focus in on those. I mean, it's easy to look past it based on the other end of his offensive game. The other side of it is, here's the thing where defensively they say that he is a committed defender and that it actually is the same thing we talk about offensively. Having some of that quickness, and he does have a 6'6" wingspan, so there's the ability to be able to kind of challenge outside shooters, stay in front of players. But this would be, I think, still where I put it in the concern category based on size, based on weight. At 175 pounds, like we've seen this even with the Brooklyn Nets and players like Mikal Bridges playing out of position. These aren't 1-to-1, but it just looks like he's bigger than you. He's longer than you. He's stronger than you. How much are you going to be able to prevent them from getting to their spot on the floor? And I don't think it'd be too hard to think about switching matchups at the NBA level or even just one-on-one and watching a player basically bully ball his way to where he wants to get to against a player like Traore. If he's not going to put on, 15 pounds would be the minimum here to feel like you could hold your weight at the NBA level on that end.
Yeah, and it's hard. And I know people get on us about this, about like, trying to, making too big of a deal about size and stuff like that. Cause we've gotten pushback from people before. It's like, oh, it's just like, well, it's not all about size, or like there's smaller guys. Yeah, I get it. I get there's guys that are smaller that can play. I'm saying if you look at the distribution of NBA players on a scatter plot where the size is thing, there's going to be some outliers. There's going to be some guys like Steph, and there's going to be some guys like Curry.
Yes, we agree. Steph Curry,
I get it. Like, I get it that those guys can exist. So no worries there. Don't
Yeah, but
need
do
a
you get it,
reminder.
Doug?
But
Like, do you
if
really
we
get
look
it?
at like the grouping, there's a reason that's going to where the plot is going to land in a certain size range,
Yeah.
because that it just we don't want to shock you here. It helps to be bigger in the NBA because you can defend more and just defend different guys, defend closer to the rim specifically is where some of these guards run into problems. And yeah, you're gonna get a Derek White every once in a while who's just like amazing at it. And I'm just saying, like, if it came down to having to choose between two guys with very similar skill sets, or like I liked all of it, and one guy was just slightly bigger than the other, I would always choose size, because that's the thing. You actually can't you can't train up a guy on size. Like, you'd say they're either that size or they're not, basically. And so with Traore, though, I actually am less concerned about him than I've seen from some other guards. Like I said before, because the speed plays, I actually think it will stick at the NBA level and if the shooting comes around, then he is elite, right?
Yeah.
Like if the shooting comes around and you're able to, like, he's able to score at all three levels really consistently, then he's totally elite. And I'm actually less worried about it, right? And so he's one of those guys, like, if you look at him compared to maybe some other point guard prospects, then I actually think I'd trust this a little bit more, only just because I could put him on the court now and at least not worried about like him keeping up with the pace and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right. And then I would, spin the wheel on hoping that it lands on the fact that the other stuff comes around. And I think there's like a reason to believe it will.
And it's also too, I mean, we talk about size, which is a factor, and I agree with you. It's give me more size first, and then I'll worry about some of the other things second or third. But the other part of it is thinking about players, whether it's defensive potential, if he can put on a little bit of weight or he has some length right now. There's also players that don't have any commitment to defensive play, right? Especially, it seems like, I don't want to generalize here, but a lot of times more of the American-born players that are elite, high-end offensive talents tend to maybe not have. Again, we always say it's not about the skill set or the ability, it's the desire to lock in a little more defensively or to make that effort on the defensive end. It's something that over the course of Cam Thomas's young career, year over year, whether or not we think he's an elite defender, he's not, but we've seen the effort. And it's actually because he has a little bit of stocky physicality to him that when you go look at some of the advanced metrics on defending guards going to the basket, Cam Thomas grades out decently there because he's big enough to be a road bump. And we talk about be the speed bump. You don't have to be a perfect defender. Just be someone that makes it a little bit more difficult for the opposing player to get to his spot, to get his shot off. So in that regard, whether it is Traore's ability to put on more weight or, as it is reported, like has a great basketball IQ, fine. Work every single angle. And that goes not only offensively, but defensively as well. So coming up here in a second, there's some other news and notes around the Brooklyn Nets maybe we'll touch into here. Some big names on two-way contracts got brought in. And we'll also take a look a little bit further as we have down the draft board list. Are there other players that we're interested in keeping an eye on that maybe try to push towards the lottery rankings? I'll go ahead and throw out a little name for everybody. And KJ Lewis, a fun body to watch. We'll dive in to close out today's show next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Gametime. Look, Gametime makes it so easy to get tickets for whatever you're going to, sporting event, comedy, theater, concert, whatever it is. They got the Gametime picks, makes getting tickets even easier for your favorite live events this year. They filters out the fluff. It's going to only show you those incredible deals and get the great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You got all kinds of stuff happening over at Gametime right now. Red Sox at Mets tickets starting at $4. That's got to be a typo, Gametime. There's no way a ticket for that game is going to start over at $4. You got Yankee tickets coming next week when they make their get back home to Yankee Stadium. All kinds of different stuff. You can get in on the football action too with Giants and Jets tickets. A little pricier than that $4 Met ticket, but that's the name of the game. It's a slightly bigger draw. Hate to break it to you when it comes to football. I don't think I'm telling anyone anything new there. It's all there for you over on Gametime. They get curated deals, make it so much easy to find exactly what you're looking for. You're going to be able to see exactly what you're going to see in the seats that you sit down on before you even get there. They got the super deals, lowest price guarantees. They got event cancellation. It's all there for you on Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You can get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
As we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, tying a pretty little bow on it. Obviously, closing thoughts certainly from Doug and myself about Nolan Traore and where he stacks up, currently sitting there in the 4th position over on Tankathon's draft board. But there are other names. We've done this last week as well, looking a little bit deeper into the draft class, Doug. But listen, I don't want to sell anybody short here. Give me your in-depth, deep dive analysis on Young G, Jackie Chu, who signed a 2-way contract with the Brooklyn Nets. And we obviously, we know this is going to be a pretty pivotal decision from the organization. Yes?
Oh, these are just my favorite moments in the Nets thing because it's the easiest thing ever to just go online and be like, I love
you
it.
Love extra.
And just
go extra these type of moments.
Oh, I just love pretending I've seen every minute that he's played, that I've been dying for him to go there. Luckily, people online catch the bit now at this point, most of them, but it's always great when you catch
it. Took a while, though.
It took a while. It took years. Like, it took years to train everybody up on this stuff. Well, it's my favorite subplot of NBA fandom, Twitter, whatever, if Twitter is sort of the proxy for this, is that everyone just loves to know everything. And no one can ever say, I don't know. I say I don't know all the time. But believe me, here's a parenting tip. Say you don't know about stuff to your kids instead of just pretending you know it. It helps them. It helps them grow up better. Do the same thing for yourself. Say you don't know. I don't know. I have to look into it. Anyway, yeah. So I don't have tons of opinions on the signing. Obviously, I know you're doing it tongue in cheek, but this is my favorite running bit is to be like, everyone. You start off with everyone knows this. I've always loved them. Dying for the Nets to sign him. Awesome stuff. Since the day he was born, I want him to be in a Nets uniform. So I don't know. I don't have a ton of high level thoughts. I think this stuff is my favorite. It's my favorite time of year with stuff like this.
100%. No, it's just fun, and obviously the Nets are making some little background moves, and it'll be interesting to see. The one thing I will say, not about any specific player, is just that's what this year is going to be built for. Taking a look at guys, bringing some guys in, having some guys play 3 games randomly in the middle of the season, and then never hearing or seeing them again. That's going to happen over the course of this season as well. Beyond Nolan Traore, as we said there in the 4th position, we've looked at some players going back a little bit further here. Obviously, there's a number of guys still inside of the lottery, but I was going down the list coming over the weekend a little bit, and I did end up looking at Arizona's KJ Lewis, and it may have been simply for the fact that after watching Traore and you're looking at some other players, you stumble across a guy who's 6'4" and 205 and kind of plays with a real physical mentality to his game. It was almost like you mentioned earlier when you're looking up the board and saying, well, obviously this isn't the same as Dylan Harper when you talk about Traore. Well, this was flipping it back the other way and back to a physical style of player. And I really only highlight him kind of for the reason of he sits there right now by Tankathon standards. He's sitting there 22nd. And I think that if you're a Nets fan, you're watching over the course of this year, you're only concerned about, are we going to be right at the top, right at the top, right at the top? But guess what? The Nets are going to kind of take care of that. There's not going to be a concern about being in a position for it, at least. But players that rise or fall in the 15 to 25, back to 30, guys are at the edge of the second round and then have a really good season, they move into those other 3 first-round picks the Nets have, and we don't know the moves that the Nets may make with those. So spotlighting guys that could potentially shift around the board and be targetable for the Nets, I think is an interesting thing for fans to look at as well as you go into this season.
Well, they just had a lot of picks. They got 4 picks, basically in the first round. So the way that the board's going to shake out, again, when we get to the end of this and it's picks 1 through 30, and we're looking at all of them, it makes sense, to kind of think about guys all in these different ranges because we actually don't know. And I'll get to Lewis here in 1 second, but because we don't know, because these picks are coming via other spots. I don't know. Some of these teams aren't going to finish. I mean, right now they're all projected to go 24 to 25. I mean, I don't know. Could the Bucks be worse? Are the Bucks a Giannis injury away from that pick looking better? I don't think
that's actually a really good reminder. Yeah.
I don't think it's totally protected right now. Right. They got the Thunder pick in there. I don't, it doesn't seem like that's going to be a good one, but I don't know. There's 3 different teams in here that the Nets are getting picks from. Could one of those just be worse and be a teens pick? It's not outside the realm of possibility. It's unlikely based on how these teams are sort of built, right? The Knicks are built pretty tough here. They could probably withstand a huge, a lot of stuff happening in the regular season and just totally be fine. But it just doesn't take much in the NBA for your fortunes to change. And we've seen it a lot. So while right now we're kind of projected 1 through 3 and then 24, 26, 30 or something like that. the fact that that's the worst it could be, basically, at the end of the first round is kind of encouraging for where they could land. With Lewis, where he stands right now, one thing you have to like about him, and actually where a guy like him could probably climb a little bit here, he's a lot older than a lot of the other guys projected above him. Sometimes that hurts you, but sometimes it means you're a year further into your development and it can just be better, shine more. Like if you're going into your sophomore year, I think at times rather than like every other of these guys is an international or freshman. Like basically every one of the top 15, top 17 is a freshman or international player. That's because you're projecting on like measurables and upside right at that point. But we've seen time and again where people that are slightly older, guys are slightly older, slip, and it ends up being a mistake.
Yeah.
Because they just happen to be just a little bit older. But their game gets like more NBA ready in that time. And because of his overall size, like he strikes me as that kind of guy.
No, and it's a good reminder because we've seen this now. Some prime example we want to talk about Jalen Wilson and feeling like the Nets have already found something in the second round, and it was he's clearly an older player. You couldn't take the risk on him, or at least it devalues where his draft stock is. But if you can do certain things like knock down perimeter shots, it's going to go a long way to cementing what you can be at the NBA level. And you can say the same thing in some regards about KJ Lewis. Good outside shot, has versatility on the defensive end. Whether or not he already started to show it and needs to continue to show it over this final year, which would be the turnovers. Like, so everything that I think he can do better, he has a year to show that he can do it all better. Improve the outside shooting, reduce the turnovers, and then also figure out what your role is going to be on the offensive end beyond kind of being a very impressive, very athletic, very strong, go at the basket kind of player. Can you go ahead and expand it full tilt? And if you do, then maybe you end up looking at some teams. And interestingly enough, maybe the Nets aren't quite the category for him, where some experience, like the floor is a little more established, you're a little bit older. That tends to maybe go to teams that want a contributor right now that they don't need to wait the extra year on, where the Brooklyn Nets would say, hey, if you guys need a year, you need a year. If you need 2 years, you need 2 years. We have nothing but a long runway. But he did jump out to me, and obviously he's in that range. To Doug's point, we don't know where ultimately, I think specifically that Bucks pick does become somewhat intriguing here to watch early in the season. But that's all for another day as we continue to roll our way through the draft class and all these players. That'll all be Brooklyn Nets. They're all going to be in Brooklyn, Doug.
I don't usually get into this idea. We'll get out of here, but I usually want to get into this idea of rooting against other teams, bad juju, don't want to fill my life with negativity, like a bunch of different reasons. This year, going to change that a little bit. Going to be rooting very, very hard against these teams that the Nets have their picks from. That's the one caveat where I'm willing to really root against the team. Otherwise, could care less. Just do what you're going to do. Doesn't really matter to me. But when it can directly, a loss can directly push the Nets' chances of a better pick up the board. Totally fine. Rooting for some else in there. I think that's anyway. That's my own personal philosophy. I know other people like.
Head-to-head matchups between the Nets and the Bucks are going to be fascinating. We can improve our chances here if we take.
It's going to be interesting. Now, those will be fascinating actually, because we got to take every L we can get, but probably still want the losses from those teams. Because the top losses are mean the most, right? Because like those top picks. But it is an interesting little math problem going on there. I'll have to think about that one. I still gonna want probably gonna need the Nets loss, but those ones at least. It would take the sting off. They're not going to beat these teams. What am I kidding? These teams are going to have 40 points. Like, what am I talking about?
You leave a little bread trail.
So one thing, I know I said we're going to get out of here. One hilarious thing I was looking at is we're talking about all these guys that the Nets are kind of bring in and this year. I mean, none of these guys are going to be on the team in 2 years. That's the other thing. It's going to be like 3 of these guys are going to be on the team in 2 to 3 years, and that's going to be it. And I think that's really not a hot take. Okay, we're going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets over at YouTube. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast, coming at you all off season long. We'll do VJ Edgecombe tomorrow. A couple other guys that in the draft board that are kind of moving around. We'll catch up on some Nets news and notes later in the week.
As long as you can savor the humorous aspect of misery and misfortune, you can overcome anything. And that is Jonathan Candy.
Oh, R.I.P. One of the greats. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.